So welcome attendees to the standard form software development contract launch. It is a pleasure to have you here, whether it be your morning, afternoon, or evening. So the short form of what we call the software development contract is the AIAC TEC SF/SDC, or just referring to it as the SDC. It is a pleasure having you all here today. And before I begin, I just want to run through some quick housekeeping rules for today. So we've divided the launch into 5 parts. First, the opening, which you just heard, and then we'll have a short overview of the SDC, following which we will have 3 segments, which you will hear from our tech members on specific portions of the SDC. And the final session will be the Q&A session. So we kindly ask for the Q&A that you post that in the Q&A function, and you can chat with each other in the chat function. That way, during the Q&A, we can answer questions from all 3 of the segments at once. And some of the speakers may respond to the Q&A by writing to your questions. So before I begin the overview, I just want to sincerely thank our tech members who were instrumental in drafting the SDC and have supported this endeavor by partaking in our Asia ADR week and today's launch. This project would not have been a success without you. So now getting to the SDC itself. I'm going to provide just a quick overview of the SDC to better prepare you for the segments today, during which our tech members will discuss in further detail how to customize the SDC, the rights and obligations of the developer and the customer, how disputes are handled under the SDC. And during this overview, I'm going to explain the format and structure of the SDC, as well as highlight the portions of the contract which parties should ensure are filled in when executing such. For those that have not already seen the SDC, I have posted it in the chat function, so you can download it and look at it there. And I'm going to be running through portions of it now. So the SDC starts with a cover page. On the left-hand side is the book cover page on the outside. And the actual SDC will start with an initial cover page. And this is where parties should ensure to write in the date of the contract, as well as the customer and developer, as well as any reference number that may be applicable for their own record-keeping purposes. So the SDC comprises 3 sections, namely the Articles of Agreement, Conditions of Contract, and the Appendices. So starting with the Articles of Agreement, the first portion is the recitals, which is shown on this screen. Now, the parties are to fill in their relevant details, state the purpose of the contract, and specify the contract sum. Now, the contract, this is how much the developer is going to be paid in total for developing the software. Next, looking at the articles that are covered by the Articles of Agreement, we have the term, project scope and specification, contract, contract sum, supervising officer and officers in charge, definitions, and interpretations. For a majority of the articles, it specifies the key details of the contract and where further information pertaining to such is provided. For example, the project scope and specifications is specified in the recitals as well as Appendix 1, and this is where the parties will specify what is the scope of the contract and the software being developed, as well as any specifications the customer requires the developer to make. Now, the contract sum is specified as stated in the recitals, and how it is going to be paid out would be pursuant to the project schedule, which is in Appendix 2. And the term of the contract is from the date on the cover page and also stated in the recitals, and until the customer accepts the software pursuant to the acceptance test. And additionally, in these Articles of Agreement, this is where you can find the terms used in the contract that are defined in Article 6. Now, there are 2 articles that the parties should be aware of, which are Article 3 and Article 5, that do require them to put some information in there when they're executing the contract. So the first one is Article 3. And in Article 3, this is where the contract is defined, and all contract documents that are meant to be incorporated and constitute the contract in its entirety should be listed down. So this is important that if you want to amend this, you will be able to. You can either delete or add any other documents that are incorporated by the parties by reference into the contract. For Article 5, this is where the parties should identify their officers in charge. So this is the person who is going to have the power to act on each of the parties' behalf. Now, the supervising officer is an optional person that can be appointed by the customer to oversee the development of the software if they so choose. Moving on now to the conditions of contract. I will first focus on the first 10 clauses and then move on to the following 10. Clauses 1 through 10 cover warranties and indemnifications, customer and developer's obligations, suspension of work, defects in testing, third-party software and materials, payments, procedure for claims of time and cost, variation, and delay and liquidated damages. Now, 3 subclauses under these first 10 clauses parties should be mindful of are clause 2.7 under the customer's obligations, clause 5.1 under defects in testing, and clause 10.1 under delay and liquidated damages. Looking first at clause 2.7, which falls under the consideration portion of the customer's obligations. The parties should ensure to specify the currency applicable to all prices quoted in the contract and specify that such is exclusive of tax imposed by any and all relevant jurisdictions. Clause 5.1, which deals with the acceptance test. The parties should make sure to specify the relevant time frame for the developer to provide the terms of the acceptance test to the customer. Now, it's worth noting that while the acceptance test was listed in Article 3 for part of the documents that would form the contract, this is something that is typically not executed at the time of contracting. Either it will be 14 days after the commencement date, or it will be 14 days prior to the inspection test, which the developer would do prior to handing over the software to the developer to do the acceptance test. So parties, when negotiating, should decide when the terms of the acceptance test should be negotiated and decided on, and make sure to fill that out in clause 5.1. For clause 10.1, this is under the failure to complete by the completion date heading, and in this clause, the parties are to specify the rate in which the liquidated and ascertained damages are to be calculated at in the event a delay occurs. It's worth noting that if the parties fail to fill out or strike out the current rate in the contract, the default rate is 0.1%. Now, moving on to the following 10 clauses. The parties in contracting should ensure to pay attention and fill out clauses 11.6 through 11.8 under confidentiality and data protection, clause 12.3 under the termination clause, clauses 13.3 through 13.7 under dispute resolution and governing laws, clause 14.4 under notices and communications, and clause 19.1 and 19.9 under warranty. The other clauses deal with non-solicitation, assignments, and subcontracting, ownership, waiver, and miscellaneous. So now running through the clauses that the parties should be aware of and make sure to fill out. The first is clause 11.6 through 11.8, which deal with data protection. Here, the parties should ensure to specify the relevant jurisdiction and data protection laws applicable to the data to be collected, obtained, stored, and processed by the developer. This is important so the software developer will know and understand which data privacy laws are applicable to the software being created and ensure that they comply with those relevant laws. Clause 12.3 falls under termination by either party. Here, the parties are to state the limit of time which constitutes a material delay if it is anything other than 30 days. That is to say, should the parties not fill out this clause, the default would be 30 days would constitute a material delay. Clauses 13.3 through 13.6 pertain to arbitration, whereas clause 13.7 pertains to the governing law. So the parties are to specify here the seat of arbitration, number of arbitrators, the governing law of both the arbitration clause as well as the contract. If they fail to specify these options or these items, the default will be Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia for the seat of arbitration, one arbitrator for the number of arbitrators, and the governing law of the arbitration clause as well as the contract would be the laws of Malaysia. Now, clause 14.4 handles written communication between the parties when providing notice under the contract. The parties should make sure to provide their relevant mailing address, fax numbers, and emails. If at any time these addresses change, the party should make sure to notify the other party of such, so that way all notices are sent to the correct address, email, and/or fax number. For clause 19.1, it covers the scope of the warranty, whereas clause 19.9 deals with additional consideration. So in clause 19.1, it stipulates that unless the parties indicate otherwise, the warranty period shall be 6 months. That means should the customer want the warranty period to last longer than 6 months, it should ensure that this portion is filled out and executed during the contract negotiations period. For clause 19.9, it requires the parties to specify the price structure that will be used should the customer request the developer to provide services for errors, omissions, and defects that fall outside the scope of warranty. That brings us to the final portion of the SDC, the appendices. These appendices can be divided into 3 categories: mandatory, if needed, and optional. Now, the mandatory appendices, which were stated in Article 3 in the contract documents, are Appendix 1, Project Scope and Specifications, Appendix 2, Project Schedule, Appendix 3, Inspection Test, and Appendix 4, Acceptance Test. Whereas the if needed appendices are Appendix 5, Upgrade Agreement, Appendix 7, Extension of Time, Appendix 8, Cost Claim, and Appendix 9, Variation Agreement. Finally, the optional appendices are Appendix 6, Maintenance Agreement, Appendix 10, Non-Disclosure Agreement, and Appendix 11, Data Protection and Security Standards. At the time of contracting, the parties should make sure to execute the mandatory appendices as well as any of the adoptional appendices they intend to include. For the if needed appendices, these would be used throughout the performance of the contract if any of these are required. So to say, if an extension of time is required, the parties may use Appendix 7 to request, approve, or deny any extension of time requests, and so is the same for the other if needed appendices. Now, I won't go into further detail of these because it will be covered by segment 1 coming up later. And so with that, I'll just move to my last slide before I conclude, which I just wanted to mention that in the coming months, we will have an online contract generator. So what parties will be able to do is we are currently have our sfc.aiac.world website under construction, but once it is finalized, when going to that page, you can look at these mock-ups that are currently on the screen. Parties will be prompted to either enter the expert advisory committee, which is dealing with our building and construction contracts, or the tech expert committee, which deals with the current contracts that we're launching today. And you will click a button and you will be brought to sfc.aiac.world/tech. And in this page, you will be able to download the contract, see the tech expert committee members, as well as the tech team. And this is where the contract generator will be. In the contract generator, parties will be able to fill in and be prompted to all of the clauses I just showed you now to fill that in, so then they can fill it in and download a Word or PDF format of the contract to go ahead and execute the finalized contract. So once this is up and running, we will make an announcement, and you will also be able to, like I said, freely download the SDC on our website. So in the interim, if you are, while the website is not up, or if you face any issues, please feel free to email us at tech@aiac.world and we will provide you with a copy. So to keep abreast of any updates on the AIAC Tech, please follow our social media pages and we will be posting things on there.